Hello, chess enthusiasts! Welcome back to the Chess Ventura channel. In this video, we will discuss one of Mikhail Tal's chess games where he played the King's Gambit opening. In this game, Mikhail Tal played as white, facing Stanislav Winter in a match that took place in 1960. The game began with pawn to e4, answered by pawn to e5, followed by Tal advancing his pawn to f4, initiating the King's Gambit. As we know, this gambit is very rarely played by grandmasters in high-level tournaments. However, this time, we will see how this highly aggressive opening is handled by the former world chess champion, known for his aggressive style, none other than the magician from Riga, Mikhail Tal. Black accepted the gambit, with the pawn capturing on f4. Tal then developed his knight to f3, controlling the h4 square. The most common continuation for black here is to push the pawn to g5, but in this game, black chose an alternative path by advancing the pawn to d5. This variation is the second most popular line in the accepted King's Gambit. Tal responded by capturing the pawn on d5. Black delayed recapturing the pawn, instead developing the knight to f6 to attack the d5 pawn with the support of the queen. At this point, Mikhail Tal played aggressively by advancing his bishop to b5 for a check, which forced black to block with a pawn. If black had blocked the check with either the knight or the bishop, white would have immediately exchanged the light-squared bishop. This exchange would have given white a quicker opportunity to castle. That's why black blocked the check with a pawn. Then white captured the pawn, which was recaptured by black's pawn, threatening white's light-squared bishop. The bishop retreated to c4, targeting black's weak pawn on f7. The game continued with black moving the knight to d5, and Mikhail Tal secured his king with a short castle. Black then developed the bishop to d6, while white moved the knight to c3, attacking the knight on d5. Black defended the knight with the bishop to e6, and Tal repositioned his knight to e4, pressuring black's dark-squared bishop. At this point, the best move for black was to castle kingside immediately, as one of the key ideas in the King's Gambit is to enable white to launch attacks on the kingside. Therefore, it's crucial for black to secure their king with castling. For instance, if white's knight captures the bishop on d6, black can recapture with the queen, and there would be no major threats for black at this point. In the actual game, black chose to save the bishop by retreating it to e7. This gave Tal an opportunity to reposition his bishop to b3, clearing the path for a pawn push to c4. Black continued with a knight move to d7, and Tal responded with a pawn push to d4, increasing the pressure on the pawn at f4. Black then moved the knight to f6, offering an exchange of knights. White declined the exchange by leaping the knight to g5, threatening to capture black's light-squared bishop. If black ignored this threat, for example, by castling, the knight would immediately capture the bishop. After black's pawn recaptures the knight, white's other knight could jump to g5. At this point, the knight threatens a fork by attacking the pawn on e6, while the pawn on f4 is also under threat from the bishop and rook. If black tries to save both pawns with a move like the queen to d6, white can push the pawn to c4, attacking black's knight. After the knight retreats to c7, white's bishop captures a pawn, threatening the queen. Black might respond by moving the queen to d7, but white's bishop would then capture the knight. After the queen recaptures the bishop, white's knight would take the pawn, forking the queen and rook. The rook is guaranteed to fall to the knight. Here, the best move for black was the bishop to g5, and this was the move chosen by black. Then, Tal moved the queen to d3, releasing the pin on the knight by the bishop. Once again, black delayed castling and opted to move the knight to d7, opening an attack on the knight on g5. Responding to this threat, Tal exchanged his light-squared bishop by capturing the knight on d5, which was recaptured by black's pawn. Tal then moved his bishop to f4, simultaneously strengthening the position of the knight on g5. We can see that white's pieces were highly active and aimed directly at black's kingside. Naturally, black's king couldn't castle due to the threat of checkmate with the queen capturing the pawn. This was the consequence of black's repeated delays in castling. Next, black tried to chase the knight away with the pawn to h6. In this position, the standard move for white would have been rook from A to f1. The idea is that if black's pawn captures the knight, white's bishop on d6 would threaten to capture the bishop on the next move. Even if black placed the knight on e5 to block the rook's attack on the bishop, white could simply capture the knight on e5. After exchanging bishops, white would gain black's light-squared bishop. In the actual game, Mikhail Tal played a highly aggressive move. The knight captured the pawn, attacking both the queen and rook. Black responded by having the king capture the knight. Then, Tal moved his knight to f5, delivering a check while also threatening the bishop on g6. This forced black's knight to capture white's knight, allowing Tal's bishop to capture the knight, delivering a discovered check. Black blocked the check with the bishop on f6, and Tal followed up by moving his rook to f4. This not only targeted black's light-squared bishop, but also prepared to double rooks on the f-file. Black responded with the pawn to h5, and Tal replied with the pawn to h3. Black withdrew the bishop to e6, and once again, Mikhail Tal demonstrated his aggressive playing style by pushing the pawn to g4, threatening to advance to g5. Black answered by capturing the pawn on g4, which Tal recaptured. In this position, black's best move was rook to h6 to support the bishop on f6. For example, if white pushed the pawn to g5, the rook could move to g6, pinning the pawn to white's king. However, after the exchange of pawns, black made an inaccurate move by playing the rook to h4, attacking the pawn on g4 alongside the bishop. Tal capitalized on this by moving his rook to f1, increasing the pressure on black's dark-squared bishop. Black responded by capturing the pawn with the rook, delivering a check, but Tal countered by capturing the rook with his rook. After black recaptured with the bishop, Mikhail Tal played a brilliant move, the queen to h7. The goal was clear: to pin the pawn and threaten to capture the bishop on the next move. Black moved the king to f8, breaking the pin from Tal's queen. Tal then played the queen to g6, pinning black's dark-squared bishop and attacking the bishop on g4. Black tried to defend the bishop by moving it to h3, but white responded with the rook to f3, attacking the bishop again. If black attempted to protect the bishop with the queen to h8, white could play a very strong move, rook to e3. The threat would be a discovered check by capturing the bishop with the other bishop. If black tried to prevent the discovered check by moving the king to d7, Tal could deliver a check with the queen to f7, leading to a checkmate in a few moves. That's why, in the actual game, black played the queen to e7, sacrificing the light-squared bishop. However, Tal was not tempted to capture the bishop on h3. Instead, he captured the bishop on f6, threatening black's queen. If the queen tried to evade capture, for example by moving to d7, white would deliver an immediate checkmate with a discovered check from the bishop to d8. Alternatively, if black's pawn captured the bishop, white's rook would move to e3, delivering a check. The black king would go to d6, and Tal's queen would move to g3, delivering another check. If the king moved to d7, the rook would capture the queen, and black's defeat would be inevitable, especially against an opponent like Mikhail Tal. Here, the best response for black was to capture the bishop with the queen, which was the move chosen by black. After white's rook captured the queen, black's pawn captured the rook. Tal then moved his queen to g7, targeting the pawn on a7. Black responded by moving the bishop to f5, attacking white's pawn on c2. Tal followed up with the queen to b7, prompting Stanislav Winter to resign. If the game had continued with rook to g8 delivering a check, white could move the king to f2. If black responded with the rook to g5, Tal's queen would capture the pawn. White had two connected passed pawns that would be nearly impossible for black to stop, especially with Tal's queen still on the board. Alright, that was a brilliant game by Mikhail Tal using the King's Gambit opening. From this game, we can learn how Tal sacrificed material and orchestrated his attacks with great precision. I hope this video helps improve your understanding of chess. That's all for today's video. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. See you in the next chess video.